I think there is a kind of ecumenical sensibility that opens up here, which sort of says there's a place, while being faithful to one's confessional tradition, there's a place to sort of expect, as a matter of course, that there are precious gems to be apprehended through ecumenical conversation. And so I think it actually makes sense why the NALC has a sort of ecumenical ethos to it. I mean, we don't want lowest common denominator ecumenism, but we do want meaningful interaction with Christians of other traditions who share our commitment to the scriptures and so forth.
Welcome to Cardigan and Collar. We were joking last time that it ought to be collar and collar. I am Nathan Yoder, Pastor Nathan Yoder of St. Martin's Lutheran Church in Maiden, North Carolina, and North American Lutheran Seminary, deployed faculty to Gordon Conwell, where I serve as the Director of Lutheran Studies. I am the guest host today because we are interviewing the regular host, David Louie, because we're talking about his lecture, Confessions as a Way into Riches. And so last time we had two collars up, and now we have the two collars opposite the cardigan. So I'm blessed to be here. My colleague is Pastor Dr. Maurice Lee. He's the pastor of Holy Trinity Lutheran in Abington, Pennsylvania. Maurice, it's a blessing, as I said, to be here with you this evening. At the end of our last podcast, Maurice, you mentioned the parable that David lifted up concerning the city. And if you were going to visit a city, what would you want to hear? What would be the advice that you would want to receive or that you would want to give someone? And you had a follow-up question you wanted to ask David.
Yeah, so I thought it was, of course, a fascinating and relevant parable or analogy. I'm wondering I'm wondering how flexible it is.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the image or the metaphor at the beginning, you said, well, one thing that you'd want to know in visiting a new city or in helping someone who wasn't familiar with a city that you were familiar with was not only the places that they should go, but the places that they should avoid.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering if that particular, if we can do anything with that, with what it means to avoid and how the confessions might help us in our exploration of the riches of the faith and of God.
And that was the third aspect, the permission to explore.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, right. That was the third piece of advice. Just go explore.
Yes.
But then
here are the parameters.
One of those things to be aware of was, well, there are places that you shouldn't, sketchy areas, right?
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to push the illustration, but I'm wondering if something like that is true of the way that our relationship to the confessions and how they help us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remember the confessions here are operating they're analogous not to the city per se. They're analogous to the guidance.
Right.
And so then what is the city, right? And the answer to the question will differ a bit on which of the vast places we have in mind. So there are some easy answers to the question. Like one would be, if the city we're talking about is the great cloud of witnesses across time, history, and context, of course, the fruits of any theological enterprise, the fruits of any time in the history of the church are always mixed. And so it is actually quite helpful when reading any particular theologian, any particular moment or school within the history of the church to have some guidance to know what's helpful and what's not helpful. And usually those things become clearer in hindsight. And so I suppose if we're talking about the great Catholic inheritance, I mean, absolutely, there are places you can go and very easily be focusing on elements of that tradition, which are actually the church has recognized in hindsight are not that helpful. Maybe one concrete example of that would be the great theologian Origen of Alexandria, right? From the very first moment that Origen writes these works, there's a recognition that this body of teachings is somewhat ambiguous, or at the very least is susceptible to being received in an ambiguous set of directions. And so the so-called Origenist controversies unfold for many centuries. And so having a confessional norm or framework allows you to actually profitably engage, say, Origen's writings. And if you take that guidance seriously, you're going to be less likely to sort of lapse into the problematic elements of Origen's inheritance, or his legacy, I guess. It's a little bit of a trickier question if the vast place we're talking about is Holy Scripture itself. Because, of course, we wouldn't want to say, nor do we believe that there are things analogous to that, unless we mean problematic ways of receiving and appropriating or focusing upon. We might say disproportionalities of concentration that can lead someone astray, not so much in that they're focusing on the wrong thing, but they're focusing on that thing in the wrong way, or in a sense that's not properly ordered or governed by what the scriptures are actually really about. And so that could take a lot of different forms. I'm trying to think of a concrete example. Maybe one would be, there was a period in North American Protestant history where a huge amount of attention was devoted to like eschatological schema or something like that. And, I think you could imagine confessionalism helping you sort of keep in right perspective, like, hey, these are interesting questions, but let's not lose a sense of balance in terms of like how these relate to the whole. So those would be a few examples of like, don't go to those places where you're likely to get over your skis. Don't go into those places where in the judgment of the church, it's just less helpful to go there than to go somewhere else.
Right. And it's interesting to think that the confessions are, in this vision that you've sketched, are precisely that that help. Not necessarily by saying avoid this, don't go there, but by giving a sort of pattern of thinking and a standard, a kind of a hermeneutical guide. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of Martin Chemnitz, who, of course, was one of the most important writers of the kind of second generation of confessional writings. He actually like wrote up these little, almost like snapshot orientations to various patristic theologians. And he would just lists out, here's what's really helpful about Ambrose. Here's some things that like, we're not going to blame Ambrose because that wouldn't be fair. But in the estimation of later church history, we can see now that Ambrose got a few things, didn't say things in ways that we would prefer he had said them. And that, by the way, was Augustine's view of his own writings. I mean, we're going to be talking with Dr. Alex Pierce coming up here in a few weeks. And I've always gotten a chuckle out of the parts in Augustine where he literally writes to his future readers and says, if in the wisdom of the church, anything that I've written here is deemed to be less than fully salutary, good, and right, then just fix it for me. He literally says, not just ignore it, but actually like pull out an eraser. I mean, I'm not saying we should actually do this, but it's a kind of an interesting, like, and that kind of sensibility is the sort of like, how I envision something like the Confessions exercising a regulative role, is that you're able then to recognize things that an earlier writer maybe didn't quite get right.
I'm handing the ball to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Now, the flip side, and I think I can probably, and our listeners can probably guess where this might go, but I'd like to hear it from you. The flip side, the other piece of advice, the first piece of advice is that there are sites not to be missed. There are certain things if you're visiting the city for the first time, or even if you're visiting it for the nth time, don't pass by these things. And how would you express that in terms of the relationship of...
Yeah. I don't know how well this works as an explanation of cities, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I think it does apply to the Confessions and to the Scriptures, which is that like there are like each city has some cultural artifact that apart from which you haven't really encountered the essence of that city. Like the city holds together in a way around maybe one, maybe several sites. And so to neglect the Empire State Building while visiting Manhattan, like you have not, I would say it's not just that you've missed one important cultural artifact of New York culture. You've actually not really, you failed to like to visit or to familiarize yourself with something that is integral to Manhattan.
You haven't met the city.
You haven't met the city. And I would say in a similar way, there are certain theological judgments which are so ingredient to the coherence of the canonical story and the economy of salvation that to prescind from those judgments or to avoid those judgments is to actually miss the whole. And so in the early church, of course, this was the view. You have like, Trinitarian orthodoxy, Christological orthodoxy. These are not factoids simply of central importance to the canon. They're actually judgments apart from which you don't have a canon. It doesn't hold together. Augustine, famously in his De Doctrina Christiana, he says, he uses the law as an example of this, that like, we know that God is working in such a way to make us love him above all things and love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so he just says, if you read any verse of the Bible in such a way that neither of these things is happening, then you're reading it wrong. And I think a Lutheran, like is fast forwarding the 16th century, I think we are saying something similar about Article 4. We're not saying that every individual bit of the Bible is about Article 4, that is the doctrine of justification. But we are saying if you read the Bible in such a way that it does not involve, that it is not informed by the judgment, that God is the one who justifies the ungodly. And of course, paired with this is a hermeneutics of law and gospel that Lutherans take. We're saying, I think, in the confessions, not just this is a really important aspect of canonical teaching. We're saying, I think it's a stronger claim. It's saying apart from this theological judgment, you don't actually apprehend how it is that this story holds together. And so those to me are the relatively short list of can't miss doctrines. Doctrines that to miss them is to lose the whole. It's a catastrophic, it's a theologically catastrophic omission in a way that some other doctrines, which are likewise true, might not be. So those to me are the absolute can't miss doctrines. I mean, which is not to say that those are the only ones that are true, but it's to say that there are these doctrines that exercise this uniquely integrative function, I would say, within the theological, the body of doctrine.
You recognized in the lecture, and we talked about it a little bit last time, the confusion and the ambiguity concerning the term generous.
Yes.
And there's one construal that paints it as we said, a kind of a radical hospitality, sell the farm aspect, and so immediately suspect.
Love, not truth, or something.
Indeed.
Yes.
And you emphasized that what you are conveying concerns the inexhaustibility of the riches of the gospel, of the tradition of the faith that the confessions bring us to, introduce us to.
Yes.
And that dovetails with your three postures regarding the confessions at the end. The posture of wonder, the posture of enrichableness, and you joked about throwing a word together. Having studied with German theologians, that's precisely what they do. They just
make up a word.
They just make up a word.
Yeah.
But the cup that runneth over from Psalm 23. And then finally, the posture of invitation. And I would submit that the invitation piece and the wonder piece and the evangelistic piece and the catechetical piece are all one seamless garment. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I think
there is a false understanding regarding generosity, but by the same token,
Yeah.
that language of invitation and the exploration of wonder.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are connotations to generous that we would want to say, no, that's not what we mean.
Yeah.
But then there are connotations of generous, which are sort of like, yes, all of those are somehow implied by what it is that we're saying here. It's the question that I've been sort of puzzling over is like, what's the anatomy of those in relation to one another? And maybe it's because I'm a theologian by vocation. I think that fundamentally for me, generous is a claim about God. Not just his generosity in terms of his graciousness, which of course is true, but also this notion of the vastness and the inexhaustibility of God. And then, but then that, I think that there are derivative implications of that. And so, for example, in the mid 20th century, there was a whole strand of theological reflection which presented generous as a kind of synonym for like ecumenically minded. You can find books and essays and articles on that. That's not quite what we had in mind. But of course, if you think that God is as we've described him to be, and if you think that the things of God are this, exhibit this unsearchable depth and breadth to them, I think it naturally encourages you to be the kind of person who's looking to be enriched by Christians of different traditions who share a commitment to that. The likelihood that you would encompass and exhaust the totality of what there is to be known about God, simply by huddling up with only members of your own confessional tradition and acting as if that's sort of the one place where heaven touches earth, and there's nothing at all redeemable in a person like John Wesley or whoever it might be. I think there is a kind of ecumenical sensibility that opens up here, which sort of says there's a place, while being faithful to one's confessional tradition, there's a place to sort of expect, as a matter of course, that there are precious gems to be apprehended through ecumenical conversation. And so I think it actually makes sense why the NALC has a sort of ecumenical ethos to it. I mean, we don't want lowest common denominator ecumenism, but we do want meaningful interaction with Christians of other traditions who share our commitment to the scriptures and so forth. So that's just one example, and I won't go as far into each of the others for the sake of time, but I think you can cash this out missiologically. The sort of the generosity of God, you can cash this out posturally. For me, though, I think the ground zero is the theological. This is true of God. This is true of the God whom we are seeking to make known, whom we are seeking to understand, whom we are seeking to about whom we're seeking to teach and catechize. And so we would expect something of that generosity to kind of be expressed in these different valences or modes.
Indeed. This is not simply an inclination. This is who God is in himself.
Yes.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Trinitarian aspect that you lifted up in your lecture.
Yeah.
The other side of it is a posture not only toward the confessions, but it's as a confessional Lutheran Christian, it's a posture in your interaction with, whether you're talking evangelism, mission, or ecumenism, or even within the Lutheran fold itself.
Yeah.
Regarding liturgical norms or the differences among Orthodox Lutherans.
Yes.
That there is a generosity there.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. Just from my own lived experience, I'll take liturgy or worship as an example out of that list. Don't you find it to be the case that no matter how rich the liturgy of a given congregation may be, it never exhausts the fullness of what the worship of the church represents across time and space. I mean, in my college years, I found my way in and out of a lot of different churches. I kind of viewed it as an occasion, a time in life when I could explore different Christian traditions and sort of see what was going on there. And I think part of what I took out of that was there is a beauty to, there's a kind of register, there's a different register to distinct modes of worship that when you behave as if there's one pristine form that is normative for all times and places and all churches, I think it's almost like a way of applying that narrow form of confessionalism to liturgical theology.
Yeah.
Because the only way that would be true is if the reality that we're seeking to enact and to acknowledge in worship was sort of easily representable through human signs. But I think that since the God whom we worship is incomprehensibly great, I think there should be a posture of openness within appropriate constraints, of course, to expressions of worship that each of which brings something to the table in terms of what it means to stand in the presence of this holy and incomprehensible God. And so, yeah, I do think it's a sensibility that sort of makes its way out into various elements of church life: worship, evangelism, catechesis, and so forth.
I take you as saying, or I take you not as excluding the possibility that, for example, certain forms of worship might be found or be criticized as being somehow mismatched to.
Oh yeah, no, definitely would not want to rule that out.
God, but,
yes,
but also this, this idea that the specific sort of the patterns of worship that we're familiar with are not all that there is, and they're not normative across all.
I think
all
you can
space and time
easily apply the parable of the city to precisely
sure, right,
the liturgical life of the church in that sense. You know, there's certain things that you don't want to do or places you don't want to go. There is to mix metaphors, there's a playing field.
Yeah.
But by the same token, there are definitely essential sine qua non high points that you need to hit, and there is a broad variety of wondrous options to explore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical about this, but why did God create what on the surface seems to be like an unnecessarily complex and diverse world? Why did God, after raising Jesus Christ from the dead, why has he allowed so many centuries of history to pass? Now, of course, this is a speculative question. I'm not going to claim I have some special insight into the mind of God, but it seems to me that you can make a case within the biblical story that a reason for this is that there's no single vocabulary available to finite creatures that exhausts what can be said and known about God. And so this dazzlingly vast, I keep using that word, but I don't know a better one, so sorry if it's getting redundant. This dazzlingly expansive and complex universe that we live in. I mean, there's an element. It's funny. I mean, like, I think the atheist looks at that and thinks there can't be any God because this is like so wasteful. Like for the sake of one little planetoid in the middle of the Milky Way against this cosmic backdrop. And the theologian in me says that's exactly the kind of world you would expect if a truly infinite God, an abyss of charity, were to speak forth a universe that is, as the psalmist puts it, made to declare his glory. And by the same token, theologians have been writing their treatises and pastors have been preaching their sermons, and cultures have been taking on the gospel for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there's a kind of wastefulness to it unless somehow in that continual processing of finite human creatures over time, there is this kind of in and among errors, of course, right? So that's an important caveat. Like, it's not that it's all good. I mean, there's lots of like, oops, we shouldn't have, you're not affirming all gestures of human culture. But even so, like, you step back and you look at the different ways that the gospel of Jesus Christ has been enculturated, has been spoken, has been expressed,
reflected and refracted.
Reflected and refracted. That's a better way to put it. And you can either see it as just a kind of unnecessary set of redundancies, or you can look at it and say, the richness of who God is and what God has done is such that all of human history is not enough to plumb those depths. In fact, isn't that what the gospel writer says, right? If everything had been written down, the world would not be big enough to contain all the books. It's that kind of a sensibility that that I think, again, bringing this back to worship and liturgy, it's not that all worship and liturgy is equally good. It's there are important we need to adjudicate what is fitting and appropriate given the theological realities that we confess. But those realities that we confess are so pregnant with meaning that you can be at a church in, I was at a church in Francophone Sub-Saharan Africa a couple of years ago, and it was completely alien to me at one level, and yet it was the apostolic faith. It was recognizably the apostolic faith. And so, yeah, I think there's a generosity in that, a generosity of spirit, and a recognition of the generosity of God when you sort of are willing to accept those enrichments from places that might be a little bit off the beaten track from your previous experience.
Right.
And the subjective side of that perhaps is what you're gesturing at with this word enrichableness, right? To be able to be enriched.
Yeah.
By that diversity, by that vastness.
Yeah, the confessions are less like, let's see, I was going to try to use like an analogy of a dartboard, where like most of what the confessions are saying are more like the outer perimeter. They're saying like the truth is in here.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a space. It's a horizon. It's like it's not, orthodoxy is not usually like here's a surgically precise, this exhausts it. It's usually more of a in between these things. Like, it's almost like the wings over the altar. You know what I mean? Like covering the holy place. That the truth of the mystery of God is in between these. And so that means that you don't, a confession, it's a little counterintuitive, right? Because you might think the longer the confession, the less room there is to take anything else on board.
Maneuvering.
It's sort of like, you know what I mean? You've got all this cargo on the ship already.
Yeah.
And you have, you know what I mean? But I actually think it's the opposite. I think if you don't have a confession, you don't have a border to your cistern. You don't have you don't have a fence around the garden. And so you don't actually have a place of fruitfulness. And so I think a confession allows you to be clear about what the parameters are. But since those parameters are, they clear out a space for fruitfulness, you actually are put in a position of not needing to be threatened by something that your confessions don't directly address, so long as it's not in contradiction to the parameters that are marked out by the confessions.
Can we think about how that might work in terms of one specific locus or doctrine? So the doctrine of the Trinity, which you spend some time on.
Yep.
There's some language, some conceptuality given to us in the Nicene Creed, the so-called Athanasian Creed, the definition of Chalcedon, as to how we're to move about within this doctrine of the Trinity. So taking those as not only guardrails but also as doors, how do we do that? I mean, how do these confessions,
yeah,
and those allied to them, sort of push us out into exploring God's reality.
Yeah. It has to do, again, I want to hearken back to this notion of in the same way that there are cultural artifacts that open up the coherence of a city. I mean, creeds do a lot of things, so I don't want to reduce it. I mean, but I think that Nicaea offers you the patterns of judgment which make visible how the canon coheres, right? They don't impose that coherence, right? We're not saying that tradition comes along and makes coherent that which was just sort of a chaotic soup or something like that. We're saying that the Nicene Creed is the hard-won work of the church's collaborative discernment as to what really is in the depth grammar, as some scholars put it, the deep coherence of the text. And without that, you will be continually confused by what it is that you're reading. And so we confess the Creed of Nicaea not because it summarizes all that needs to be said about God. Certainly not all that needs to be affirmed as pertinent from the biblical witness. This is a constant source of confusion where I've heard many New Testament scholars say, where's the Sermon on the Mount? Where's all the miracles? Like these creeds, they just emaciate down. You see what I mean? The assumption seems to be that the purpose of a creed is to be like a miniature, you know what I mean? Like a miniature canon. Like you need to get everything in there that you deem essential.
Comprehensive.
No, if that's the case, it jumps over most of the entirety of salvation history.
It was never. It just, when I hear these things from well-intentioned scholars, I'm just like, no one has ever thought that a creed was supposed to be that. Or if they did, they were doing so in a manner that's utterly contrary to the intention of those who wrote the creed.
Or that the solution to that is to ignore the creed. I mean, that's
right. Yeah. The creed facilitates access, right? By making visible to us sort of, these deep principles of coherence.
This is a different image, but you talked about the depth grammar, which other scholars, that's an idea that other scholars have used. And it strikes me that in any grammar, doesn't limit the number of things that you can say.
That's true.
Right. But it's that by which all the things that can be said make sense.
That's right. Yeah. No, exactly. I hadn't thought of that sort of metaphorical extension of the idea of grammar, but you're exactly so.
You opened your lecture describing generous confessionalism as one aspect. Would you, after having explored all of the different facets, say that apart from simply being one aspect, that generosity needs to be in the driver's seat?
That's interesting. Boy, I hadn't thought about it that way. And
by generosity, we're talking about all of the facets of that ambiguous term.
When you say
that are positive rather than the against self-definitions that we've been discussing.
Nathan, when you say driver's seat, in the driver's seat, do you mean that should inform the generosity of our confessionalism, should inform everything else that's true about our confessionalism?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean, that's a bit more ambitious than what I intended when I was drafting the lecture. I'm trying to think now how I would answer that. I mean, there's a sense in which, if by generous we primarily mean that the confessions exist to plumb us in to the riches of Jesus Christ, to the riches of the Scriptures, to the riches of the Catholic tradition across time, then I mean, my impulse is to say, well, that
the way to riches.
That is what they are fundamentally for. That's the thing that's the thing apart from which your confessionalism is going to fall into some kind of very serious dysfunction. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still thinking about this notion of a driver's seat. As I'm thinking about like other possible functions that one could lift up as very important. But yeah, I guess I would say my impulse is to say that a confessional body of teachings, first and foremost, is meant to ground you more fully in the riches of Jesus Christ and all of the different forms that takes. So. Yeah, sure. Provisionally, yes.
Amen.
Can I ask, thinking about the last part of the lecture where you get personal and you talk about your encounter with the NALC, particularly, and that's where the image of the cat finding the milk on the
two
porch.
Cats in the saucer of milk.
Right. Yeah, that was taken and run with by others of the speakers. But you said that it was particularly in the group that used to be called the Younger Theologians, now Lutheran theologians of the church, that you sensed a sort of a theological hospitality.
If you look at the three of us, you can tell why they changed the name.
Yeah, that's true.
And I wonder if you could describe that just a little bit more for us. And then I'd be interested in hearing whether that what you took to be, what you interpreted as and experienced as a certain kind of hospitality, whether that's something that could be translated to our churches and congregations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, autobiographically, my background theologically is very cross-pollinated. Let's put it that way. My maternal grandparents were missionaries in the Bible Church in Venezuela. My paternal grandfather was baptized in the ENR, which is, I believe, the American extension of the Prussian Unionist Church. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's right. He then had a kind of a conversion experience into the Baptist Church, specifically the General Association of Regular Baptists, which they sometimes refer to themselves as the Garbage Baptists. This is the GARB. I was dedicated as an infant in the Covenant Church. Then we found our way into the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. But as sort of, as a family, we weren't really self-consciously Lutheran. It seemed like a good church and the pastor was willing to have us. We had a great experience there. Went off to Wheaton College, which is a kind of neo-evangelical, at least in its current instantiation, pan-Protestant. Did my PhD at a Roman Catholic Jesuit school. So I think part of what I've experienced in my life is kind of like the possibilities of theological enrichment when you are exposed to these various streams, but also the very real possibility of feeling confused as to how to put all these pieces together. And so I think, in a sense, I've always been kind of looking for what's a theological or ecclesial or confessional space that has a coherence, like a durable, like a sturdiness to it. Like it's not just a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just a kaleidoscope. It's not just a mishmash of different ideas.
Not just diversity for the sake of diversity.
Yeah, it has a coherence to it, but it's the kind of coherence that allows that, as I said before, kind of like has a creative space, like a space within which to continue the church's perennial task of contemplating and confessing and preaching the great things of God, and not assuming that the way to be faithful is just to repeat what people were saying 200 years ago or 500 years ago. Like there has to be something of that living dynamism.
Yeah.
And I think that, there are strains of confessionalism where you have the sturdiness, but you don't have the living dynamism. And if it's that or anything goes, then I'll take the sturdiness, right? That's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I absolutely would without hesitating, take the sort of sturdiness of that.
The bones have to be good.
But I think what I so immediately picked up on in that first meeting when I just came in as an outsider, as a sort of, by that point I was theologically Lutheran, but didn't quite know who I belonged to and who would have me, to be honest, because of my somewhat cross-pollinated background. And I just sensed immediately, like, this was theologically serious.
Mhm.
This was not just anything goes. This was, we're here as confessional Christians, but there was like a real living conversation happening. Like we were not just trying to prove to each other that we were saying the same thing that they were saying 500 years ago. We were being faithful while simultaneously, like, I don't know, engaging the thing itself. And that was, I don't know, it was a funny thing. The other thing that happened at that first meeting is the bishop of the NALC, who then was Bishop John Brodowski. I don't think I've ever told him this. At the dinner, he stood up and just said a short, probably to him it was just a small thing, but he just said, he just looked at us and said, theologians are so important to the life and health of our church. And so those two things, to a church body that is sort of somehow has this coherence, this integrity, this sturdiness of confession, coupled with this dynamism of living faith and living theological inquiry, and then that being linked with a real recognition of the vital importance of theology for the life of a church body. I was like, these are my people.
Sign me up.
I mean, I wasn't part of an NALC church and there wasn't one nearby, but I just thought, well, that's like, at least I know that those people exist now, because,
Right.
and they're kind of, and I would tell people, like they would, what church body do you belong to? And I would say, well, I'm attending at this church and, that's great. But like, really, I identify most closely with the ethos of the NALC. And so it really was a wonderful surprise and privilege years later when I got the call to come and be considered for this position.
Yeah.
So you are here because of the posture of invitation.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. I was drawn to it. Absolutely. Like a cat drawn to a warm saucer of milk on a porch.
Well, David, thank you. And thank you for your continuing witness to the apostolic faith and teaching our future pastors and theologians.
It's my pleasure.
If you have not had a chance to listen to the lecture, we encourage that you do so. And like and subscribe, Cardigan and Collar. And I won't see you next time, but these fine gentlemen to my left and right will. So it's been my blessing to share this time with you.
Cardigan and Collar is a podcast of the North American Lutheran Seminary. It is hosted by Dr. David Louie and the Reverend Dr. Maurice Lee. This podcast is produced by Emily Clark and Stephen Neaton, and the theme music is performed by Mary Van Hooser. To learn more information about the North American Lutheran Seminary, visit the NALS.org.